What is up, everybody? It is your boy Nick Noodles coming at you with another great video. Today we are continuing the series of how to start botting in 2021, but today's episode we're going to be focusing all on proxies. Proxies are becoming so important in the botting game. It's arguably more important than the bot itself right now because websites are going crazy on their bot protection, especially dealing with how they ban certain proxies. So let's just break it all down, talk about what a proxy is, the different types of proxies, and just some general advice and best practices when using these proxies that you buy from different providers. So starting off with what a proxy is, it's essentially a set of IP addresses that you're using in order to send multiple requests to a single website. Now, to better understand why we need the proxies, we have to understand what happens if we don't use proxies. So the computer that you're running a bot off of has a single IP address linked to it. This is usually known as its local IP address or a localhost IP address. And an IP address is pretty much just a unique identifier on a network so that all these computers communicating with each other on this big network can understand who is who. Now, if a company sees you sending multiple requests to a website from your single home IP address, what they will do as an anti-bot protection measure is just ban that local IP address so that you can't spam their site. Now, you wouldn't really experience this if you were just running one or two tasks to try and check out. However, if you were running like hundreds or even like 1,000 tasks, they would ban you almost immediately because they don't want to be attacked by your one computer. And so to get around this, botters have been using proxies in order to kind of spoof all the tasks that are going towards a website. From the website's end, if you're using proxies, it'll look like 100 different instances trying to check out from 100 different locations. But the proxy is just masking the true location, which is just from your home computer. So there are three types of proxies. There are data centers or DCs, there are ISPs, and there are also residentials or resis. Let's break down what all three of those are really quickly. Data center or DCs are proxies that are generated by some random company out there, and they're hosted usually on a cloud server. ISPs are kind of similar. However, they are generated by an actual internet service provider and then put onto a server. And then lastly, we have residentials, and these are pretty much home IP addresses. And I don't know the specifics of how each of these three are actually like generated or maintained because it seems kind of arbitrary. However, I can explain the differences between the three and how they affect botting. So let's talk about the pros and cons of all of these proxies. ISPs and DCs are always grouped together because they're usually both hosted on a server. Their origin is really the only thing that separates them apart. Because ISPs come from an actual internet service provider, they are usually more reliable than DCs and less likely to get banned. However, in general, these types of proxies are going to be more likely to get banned because they are a lot faster. Speaking of which, proxies are usually measured by the amount of time it takes for them to ping a website. For ISPs and DCs, you can expect times anywhere from 5 milliseconds if you're like on a server and it's super fast, to around 100 to 200 milliseconds. Anything below 200 milliseconds is usually pretty fast. Now, resis, on the other hand, are going to be about 3 or 4 times slower. You might be able to get some really good resis that can run 200 to 400 milliseconds to a website. However, the majority of them are going to be around 800 to 1000 milliseconds, maybe even slower. So because they are slower, they're going to be less likely to get banned. The purchasing options for these three types of proxies are also very different. ISPs and DCs are usually purchased in quantities of 25, and that quantity of 25 can usually range between $50 to $75. I pay $56 for 25 cookie ISPs. But if you're in one of those really good invite-only Discord servers that has proxies, you might be paying upwards of $70, and that's because they're more guaranteed to work on any given website. Residential proxies are usually purchased in 1 gigabyte increments, similar to how a phone data plan works. And this 1 gigabyte increment is usually $10 to $20, depending on if you can get a discount or whatever. I pay $22 for 2 gigabytes of space resis. So now let's talk about some good practices and just advice when dealing with proxies. Websites, again, are just getting so good at banning proxies that all these providers have. And pretty much if you don't have good proxies, you're not going to be able to check out on any given release. Not having good proxies can pretty much spoil the entire release. You won't hit anything. Supreme has pretty much clipped every single ISP and DC. You pretty much have to run localhost task only, and that means you're pretty limited on what you can buy. Hopefully with this next season, some of these proxy providers can be more reliable, but for the most part, most of them don't even guarantee Supreme anymore. Foot sites are also banning lots of proxy providers left and right. The Jordan 1 Volt release that just happened yesterday was very difficult for a lot of botters because their proxies just got banned right out the gate. Shopify releases, when they have bot protection on, they can throttle pretty much every single proxy provider. So when you're running Shopify, you likely won't even use proxies. You'll just run 1 or 2 tasks off your local host. So for this reason, because, proxies are getting banned left and right, it's usually best practice to run multiple different providers, especially if you're just starting off. It can take a lot of time to find a proxy provider that works for your setup. Proxies are going to behave differently on each bot. They may work on your bot and then they may not work on another. So you have to just keep constantly experimenting with different providers and find out what works for you. This can be very expensive at first. If you think about it, $50 for 25 ISPs or DCs, that might not even work for you. So you have to get 2 or 3 different providers. That's an easy $150 right out the window. And you haven't even bought residential proxies at that point either. So it can be very easy to spend over $200 in your first month of botting just on proxies alone. But it's just something that you have to do in order to refine your setup. Once you find a provider that, works for you, then you can scale it back and just buy proxies from them. But even then, your proxies could be banned at any moment. So again, I highly recommend having as many providers as you can afford during a month. Finding working proxies is going to be difficult. A lot of the very good proxies that are consistent every single release, they're pretty much in invite-only Discord servers. I think Trek Proxies has been really good lately on foot sites. They're invite-only. Hollow Proxies is also really good on foot sites and Supreme. Again, they're invite-only. The only way to get into those groups are to follow them on Twitter and hope you can get into their Discord off one of their restocks. Generally, the proxies that are always out of stock are going to be better than the ones that are always in stock. There's a reason why they're always in stock, and it's probably because they're less reliable, even though some people are able to cook with them. Always use a 1-to-1 task to proxy ratio. This can lessen your chances of getting banned on a website. A lot of these proxy providers monitor what you're doing with their IP addresses, and if they notice you're abusing them by using multiple tasks to one proxy, they can pretty much just ban you from the entire service and not allow you to use their stuff. Even on foot sites, there's 4 different foot sites: Foot Locker, Foot Action, East Bay, and Champs. You should only be using a 1-to-1 task to proxy ratio. You should not be using one proxy to try and check out on all 4 of those sites at the same time. Proxy providers will take all your proxies away from you if they find you doing that. Proxy providers usually let you generate as many residential proxies as you want. They will also usually let you choose from different pools. You'll likely want to have a pool set up for the site itself, and then maybe use like a generic location pool depending on where you are. You can usually read their guides and they'll recommend what pools to use. Because you can generate as many proxies as you want, residentials are really good for sites like Foot Sites and Yeezy Supply, where you want to be running pretty much as many tasks as you can to try and get through queue and check out. The more proxies you generate and use, the more data you will use in the end. Proxy providers in general have been limiting when their proxies are available. This is mainly only with ISPs and data centers. A lot of them only turn them on during an actual release. So keep that in mind. If you're planning on going for restocks, it might be good to have some residential proxies on hand, because usually they don't turn those on and off. It's mainly just ISPs and DCs. And proxy providers are doing this pretty much just to preserve them and, try to limit people running them 24/7, which is how they can get banned. I recommend starting off with 25 ISPs and 2 gigabytes of residential proxies. That'll be enough to get you started. However, again, you might want to get as many proxies as you can afford to see what works for you. But 25 ISPs and 2 gigabytes of resis is definitely the bare minimum, and you can scale up from there. Depending on your bot, you may not use that much data during a release. When it comes to setting delays on your bot with proxies, for a site like Foot Sites and Yeezy Supply, you can probably turn your delays a lot higher. Especially because they're going to be running for such a long time. If you run your delays too low, they could get clipped a lot easier. On a site like Supreme or Shopify, you might want to play around with your delays, make them maybe really fast before the release, and then right when the release happens, slow them down so that when it's going for restocks, it's a lot slower than the initial release. But yeah, that pretty much wraps up my thoughts on proxies. They're just so important nowadays. I think they're more important than the bot, to be honest. And again, finding working proxies is just going to be trial and error. It could take you several releases, weeks, or months to find what works best for you. But that's just the name of the game right now and the state of botting. I personally use Space and Xenu Resis. I've been also using Cookie ISPs, and I will start to use Hollow Proxies. So I'm excited to see how those do, and I'm excited to see how my selection goes moving forward. I'm likely going to have to adjust because they're going to get clipped, but we'll just have to wait and see. If you have any questions regarding proxies, definitely leave them down in the comments down below. And I hope to see you on the next video.